This is a good trick to know. It handles the two knights opening really well because one of the most popular moves is quite literally bishop c4. Yeah, this knight takes e4 trick doesn't just win the game for me, but people react to it poorly, so I end up with an amazing position. And even if they react to it as best as they possibly could, it would still be good for black. All right, we got the black pieces. E4, what do we like? I'll play e5 and let's see what we can do. Start with e5, you know? It's a good good first move. I think knight f6 is an unnecessary move. Back to the video in just a moment, but first I want to talk to you guys about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is turning what used to be a long trip to your therapist's office into an easy to schedule live video session, a text away that you can have from the comfort of your own home. Having access to BetterHelp's vast network of licensed professionals all through their website or the app, shout out to the app, makes a huge difference for those that are seeking help. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's done online. And by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. Finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. But with BetterHelp, you gain access to a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists. So what are you guys waiting for? Try affordable online therapy with BetterHelp today. Visit betterhelp.com/chessbrah.tv for 10% off your first month. You can find that in the description below the video. Okay, so of course we can play bishop c5, but knight f6, I think I'm gonna go with this one. Maybe we'll see the fried liver. I feel like playing against the fried liver is kind of instructive, but okay. Opponent just plays knight c3, which is fine. Now we can just play bishop c5 or bishop b4. I actually really like those setups where you just go bishop b4, you take, and you go h6, d6, you know, really simple. There's a reason, and this usually happens the other way around, but there's a reason why. I mean, let's be honest. This is like a storybook, you know, picturesque way to develop your pieces, but there's kind of a reason why it doesn't really happen this way. As white, you usually play d3 here. If you do want to play knight c3, play it after. But if you start with knight c3, then you always have to be at least conscious of knight takes e4. And what usually happens is you'll see that the other way around. Is that white will play knight c3, black will play bishop c5, and white takes on e5. And it's a very common idea to play d4 and fork the pieces. But obviously it can happen the other way too. Knight c3, knight takes e4, and knight takes e4, d5. Exact same idea. So if we take on e4 and they play bishop takes f7 to get rid of our castling privileges, it also kind of works out for us because even though we can't castle, we play d5 and we have the two bishops. So I'm going to play knight takes e4 here, which is just, I don't even, I guess I could call it a tactic. It doesn't really win any material. Technically, but I think it's a pleasant continuation. We play d5, bishop takes, we just take with the queen. We're gonna have two bishops there. So knight takes e5 is a weird move because, first of all, you got two pieces hanging. This looks like a separate issue from these two pieces. So if I play knight takes knight on e5, I'm still attacking two pieces. So I feel like we're not going to rush and take one of these guys and let him do whatever he wants. I'm just going to take that knight, and then you still got two pieces hanging. So we created some confusion in the middle of the board. He just needed to realize, oh, I'm up a piece right now. Let me just play bishop back and recapture. And then the material is even. But instead he goes knight takes e5, and I'm just feeling like after knight takes e5, he may continue to find himself in trouble here. But let's see. Let's see what he comes up with. Because knight takes c4 is a move, pawn takes e4, pawn takes c4. I have three different captures that I can do on the next move. And if bishop check, then we'll make sure to play c6 and keep two of his pieces attacked. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5. Of course, I'm recapturing that free piece. And now I gave up one piece temporarily with knight e4, and I actually got one back on e5 and got one back on d5. So now I'm ahead a piece, which is kind of surprising, actually, considering where we started. This move is good, though. This one is a good move by him. I'm pretty attracted to the move bishop b4 check here, because if the king moves, that's obviously a good thing for us. If the bishop goes here, even a trade would be good. I'm ahead a piece, so any trades I'm a big fan of. And if knight c3, not only could I take it for more trades, but g2 is hanging. And if pawn to c3, then I'm looking at knight takes d3, which is a check, and the e4 knight would be hanging. So this just looks like a nice way to get developed here. I'll take any piece trade. I mean, I have 3 minor pieces. My opponent has 2. I'll trade any one of mine for any one of yours at any point in the game. Okay, so we can take it, but also queen takes g2 looks like the way to go. It hits the rook on h1, and my opponent is missing a lot of the pieces that honestly he should have on the board. So instead of rushing with bishop takes knight, which I can always play, I think we'll play queen takes g2. We'll hit the rook, and now white will be forced, pretty much forced, to play rook f1. And then you can imagine I'm gonna have some very, very nice options there with regards to how to proceed. So the next kind of moves we're looking at, bishop g4 looks like one, bishop h3 if the rook went there. Instead we see king to d2. Interesting. Now my attention is kind of focused on queen takes f2. It's focused on bishop to g4, and it's focused on knight to f3. Those are like the main moves I would start with. So queen takes f2, queen e2. I would love to move this knight somewhere, but it can't move at all. So this is the one I am not sure I actually like, because I don't really see a way to play after that. Knight f3, then the king has options. Let's say knight f3, king e2. We could bring the bishop to g4. We could play knight back to d4 check. If knight f3, king e3, there's also bishop c5 there. Knight f3 is looking like a very, very strong move. And queen takes f2 doesn't compare to it. So the only other move I'm going to consider is bishop to g4 to hit the queen. Because if the queen moves and it does not have many squares, like queen f1, let's say it went to queen e1 though, again, I don't like the feeling of this queen coming to the e file and pinning the knight. That's what I've realized from calculating for a minute or two. Is that when the queen goes here, pinning that knight, it's a threat. I have to deal with the threat. I don't have time. I don't have time. So I'm a big fan of knight to f3 check as a result. So we'll see where he moves, but Both of these moves, I think, bishop g4, bishop c5, something like that should be very strong. Bishop g4 rather. Yeah, so I think bishop g4 here. That will set up a very nasty looking skewer. And yeah, I can see here that my opponent did not want any part of that. Just the resignation on the spot. I mean, it's a very tough spot to be in. I was probably going to go bishop g4, but yeah, knight d4 was also on my mind there. But this was very quick, right? So we just played knight f6, knight c3, and immediately knight takes e4, knight takes e4, d5. And black already has, I would say, a slight advantage here. I'm not winning any material, but I'm definitely improving my position. Now I have more control of the center. And I'll play bishop d6, castle, maybe f5. But instead he overreacted here. He played knight takes e5, and after knight takes, white's just dead. Yeah, my next move is going to be knight takes bishop. So moves like queen h5 don't work. d4 doesn't work. I'm going to play knight takes bishop. Bishop b5, I'm playing c6. And again, two pieces are attacked. They're both attacked right now. It does not look good. And then we just played bishop b4 because white's best move is probably this. And I was fine like to take and just castle. Not trying to do anything too crazy here, just take castle. My next move is probably bishop there, because guess what? I'd like to keep trading. Nice and simple. Curious if they gave us a brilliancy. Do they give out brilliancies for knight takes e4? It's like, it is a good move, and I feel like if chess.com did give out brilliancies for that move, that it would be it would be good on their part, because it would reinforce that that's actually a very good trick to know. But alas, no brilliancies. Oh, it's book. Book? This is not a book that white should be reading, that's for sure. This is not a book that white should be reading. We keep playing like a 1450. Our rating's surely gonna go up. All right, it wasn't a very long game, but I mean, king in the middle of the board, not gonna be a good sign. Obviously, white's in serious trouble here. Lost a piece. And then king in the middle, wide open. This is a disaster. Okay, black pieces, and what are we playing against? E4. All right, E4. What are we feeling like? Okay, I'm gonna play E5. Truly, we've played a lot of different openings against E4. It's probably fair to say I don't think I've played E5 too much. Knight F3. The plot thickens. Still many options with black. Gotta play the most played opening. I agree. Yeah, E4, E5. Definitely an important one. Stafford Gambit time. Just for that, we're gonna play Knight C6. Can't be caught playing that opening in public. Keep it principled. I agree, Tim. The people need to see some principled moves. All right, Knight C3. Okay, well, it looks like we're probably just gonna get some 4 knights action here. That's what it looks like, at least. Knight C3, probably just Knight F6. 4 knights, baby. We didn't get the Italian, we didn't get the Ruy Lopez. I'm just gonna go knight here. If I played bishop to C5 instead of knight there, then I might get hit with knight takes E5 and D4. That's a common trick. Similarly, if white plays bishop C4, Now we can do the exact same thing to them. Knight takes e4 and d5. And this is a pretty well-known idea, which works out really really nicely for black. So when you see these knights there like that, and then they play bishop c4, it works even without this knight, this concept. But definitely important not to fall for it yourself with bishop c5. And now that he's played it, the idea is knight takes. If knight takes, we play d5. And if knight takes, bishop takes here, and then knight takes back. Yes, we've lost our castling privileges, but the two bishops and the center will give us really, really good compensation. So we're going to play knight takes e4 here. Curious how he handles it. This is a good trick to know. You know, it handles the two knights opening really well because one of the most popular moves is quite literally bishop c4. And if they don't play bishop c4, it would be weirder for them to play bishop b5, because then it's like, why didn't you just play the Ruy Lopez? All right. Time for d5. If I don't play this move, then none of what I just did makes sense, right? So have to fork these pieces and win something back. And yeah, if I'm playing with the white pieces here, there's definitely something that I want to do, and it's save the bishop. So interestingly enough, he saved his bishop, but he hasn't kept the pawn. So it's like maybe the worst option he could do is move the knight, because then he loses the bishop and doesn't get a pawn back. The second best option he could do is maybe like d3 or queen e2, because at least he loses the bishop but gets a pawn back. You know, if he saves the bishop but doesn't get a pawn back, there's that option as well. But he's chosen what I would say is maybe not the worst option, but possibly one of the worst. He's not getting material back. He should play bishop d3. The best move is saving the bishop and reclaiming the pawn. And there's only one move that really allows you to do that, and it's bishop d3. So he's played bishop b3, and it's like, oops, he's losing that piece. Another one's being attacked, and if he gets ideas like, oh, fried liver time, then he's gonna have a rude awakening. Queen takes g5. So the most annoying and frustrating part about this position is that his knight actually has no squares. It must go back to the starting square, which not only is hard to realize, but disheartening to even do once you realize it. So already it's on move 6 here, and we've got a better position just because of a simple move, simple trap to be aware of. It's not the type of trap where after bishop d3 we would have been completely winning and, you know, white can resign. Not at all. The material would be even, actually, but it's still beneficial for us to do that. And I credit him for finding knight g1, honestly, because it's very easy for him to continue to blunder after that. So knight g1, it's up to us. There's definitely a lot of good moves here. Bishop c5 will be a nice move. Knight d4, maybe to take the bishop, is a nice move. Bishop anywhere, just in order to castle, great. But there's definitely something that stands out to me as a potential move, and it's queen g5. Very aggressive, very risky looking, because it lines my queen up there. But queen g5, hitting the pawn, if king f1, we could already say queen g5 is worth it. Already worth it, because king f1 is a very bad move. After this queen move, if g3, then I'm thinking my next move, bishop to g4, is a pretty good one as well. So I like queen g5 because it's very forcing. The bishop is way over here, and white's not ready to castle. So I think queen g5 is a really good move here, and I'm probably going to go with it. But if you ended up going for a bishop move in order to castle, I mean, that would be a great idea as well. So queen g5, hitting this pawn. I always caution lower rated players to really triple and double check every single move. When your queen is on one of these squares, double and triple check every single move that it's not hanging to the bishop. And obviously before you put it there, double check the exact same thing. Because I can tell you these two squares right here are not usually safe for the queens to go. And I can't count the amount of times people have played this move when it's been safe. And then d4 gets played and they just take the pawn and they blunder their queen. It's such a common blunder. So if you make this move and it's safe, great. But on the next move, double check. You don't even have to check other pieces. Check the damn bishop. That's all you need to look out for. That's the main piece that's going to be taking your queen on that square. G4 and G5 are caution squares. It takes 10 seconds, 5 seconds to just double check whether or not your opponent's bishop is attacking you. That's it. Can I show an example of what it would look like to hang the queen? Yeah, I'm not falling for that. I ain't falling for it. Nice try. Okay, the most natural move in my opinion. Bishop G4 was going to be my follow-up move. It hits the queen, and white has some options and some important choices to make. After bishop to G4, then you have to start thinking, okay, if knight E2, I go like bishop F3, and I'm right in there, right? But if pawn goes to F3 and I take, knight takes, queen H5, boy, that's starting to be really strong. And don't forget, knight D4 is coming in as well with the pin. So to me, bishop G4 is an all-star move here. All because of this knight takes E4 move. Bad things may be happening. Queen is trapped. So these are the only two moves that stand out. There are other moves to play, but those ones are definitely the main two that come to mind. But if white wanted, he could technically play a move like that. It could be played, right? Because then there's a counterattack. So you always have to watch out for stuff like that. The safest looking move is definitely knight E2 because D4 needs some calculation to hang your own queen. And F3 takes, queen H5 honestly looks damn scary. It really does. E4 and knight D4 coming in. So I would say knight E2 appears to be the safest move. But it may actually be the move that gets you hurt the most. But what is an example of what I've been talking about with my queen is like people will play queen G5, great move. Then they'll play bishop G4, great move. And then after knight E2, they might play bishop F3. Maybe hitting the rook, right? And then white will go D4. And then you'll be like, bishop take H1. And you'll lose your queen and you'll lose the game. Which is a reminder that you always have to be looking at your queen, looking at bishop on C1. Just always check every single move. Is it attack? No? Okay, proceed. Is it attack? Yes? Okay, then deal with it. So common. I see this mistake all the time. F3 played. Nice move. We're gonna take. Okay, after we take, we have an idea of maybe playing F2 check, right? That is a discovered check. Or not really discovered check, it's a discovered attack. F2 check, taking the queen, winning it. Okay, if knight takes here, we're probably gonna play queen H5. That way we increase the pressure on the pin. There are these other small details like, you know, after knight takes here, why do we go queen H5 to increase the pressure on the pin? Why don't we go queen F5? Why don't we go queen F6? And it's just kind of a force of habit. Like the more games you play, the more you get used to H5 just being the best square. On F5, there may be a situation where white can play knight H4. Get out of the pin and hit your queen. and it's not nice to allow that. Queen f6, there might be a situation where your bishop is hanging and it needed to be defended. Maybe when white castles and a rook shows up here, you don't want your queen to be on the same line as that rook. There might be another knight move that bothers you. Queen h5 is just totally safe. The knight is completely pinned, can't move, and the queen is on a safe square. It also supports the bishop and puts a little more pressure on that diagonal. Directly on that diagonal, not just on the knight. So queen h5 here for sure. Now this is a massive threat. Castling to defend it is, 100% the move that makes the most sense. And yes, it feels great here that my queen is no longer on that danger square. So that's another good thing that's happened. I think white should castle. Makes the most sense. Guards the knight and gets the king out of the way. Once the king ends up there, I will have a couple follow-up options. The first one, we're thinking about this pin here. The first one that seems obvious is e4, because that is the best way to win a pin piece. Attack it with a knight, or with a pawn rather. In this case, it's a knight. We also have knight d4, which also threatens the knight and appears difficult to defend. But the thing with knight d4 is maybe this bishop from far and wide can show up on d5 to defend it, right? It's possible on this move that bishop there might get played. So just always have to keep that in mind. If the bishop came here right now, I'd probably long castle and attack it, and then basically get ready for the next move. Either long castle or knight d4. One of those two. So we'll see how he wants to defend it. He's only got one piece out in the bishop because this guy developed potentially into his doom. But I'm going to have some very tempting options next between those two moves. Obviously, after castling, bishop c5 check should come to mind as well, and is a very good option. But the cursory reaction is definitely that e4 and knight d4 add pressure to the pinned piece, and that should be good enough. How did the opponent end up in such a poor position? Well, you guys, first of all, you guys watched it, right? You watched it all happen. So you could probably answer that as well as me, but it looked so innocent, so innocuous. Just the two knights out, it ended up being a 4 knights game, bishop c4. And I think if you don't know to play knight takes e4 the way I did, and you just play a normal move, bishop c5 or d6 or bishop e7 and castle, you would be playing a much different game here on move 10. But just knowing one simple trick like that is honestly enough to change the whole game. All right, so rook f1. Let's examine a few things here. First of all, the king's not on g1, so there's no bishop c5 that we should be considering here. The next thing is if we play knight d4, the first thing that comes to mind for me is knight takes d4. And if I go hunt that queen down, there is bishop takes f7, and I also lose my own queen. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's bad for me, but I would have to calculate it. Just got to make sure we calculate that out. Knight takes, bishop takes queen, bishop takes here, queen takes, rook takes, king takes on d1, and pawn takes on d4. Is everyone following? Practice your visualization. What's the material count in that final position? That's a lot of moves, but what's the material count at the end there? Is it something I can go for? Feel confident in? So far, I've seen a few correct answers, which sounds honest. Because honestly, that is a lot to calculate and visualize. Make sure you're remembering which pieces actually disappear from the board and which ones are still on. I end up a rook. I'll have a full extra h8 rook. So this already looks comfortable in that sense. After knight d4, though, I do have to look at bishop d5. This is a move I mentioned before, that after bishop d5, you know, it does guard the knight, and while I can castle, suddenly it's a whole other calculation. So instead of knight d4, the other thing I can do is I can play e4. And this is pretty nice as well. e4, as I mentioned, is the best way to win a pin piece. The best. Because if I add a knight on, my opponent can defend with a bishop, right? Like, I'm adding a piece, they're defending with a piece. If I attack a piece with a pawn, you can't defend a piece with a pawn. Because even if you did, even if that insane move was somehow legal, it wouldn't save your piece. I would just take with the pawn and I would win the piece. So attacking a pinned piece with a pawn is the strongest thing you can do because it guarantees you're going to win the material. So e4 looks undeniably good. If the knight moves anywhere, we take the queen. If queen e2 to pin the pawn, we just take, rook takes, queen takes, and obviously at the end of the day, we won a rook and a knight for a bishop. So e4 looks overwhelming to me. Looks like the best move by far. And although knight d4 looks good, I think e4 looks better. And at this point, there are definitely some moves that, I'll be honest, like I'm not calculating here. And it's not because I'm not saying them out loud. I'm just actually not calculating them. Because you kind of have to trust that in a position like this, that you're making the right decision. So like bishop f7 here, I'm not really calculating, to be honest with you. I just know that my opponent's in serious trouble here. Bishop f7, it's like queen takes. Okay, there's still a pin there. I know I'll be up material at the end of this no matter what. If the knight moves somewhere and I take the queen and I lose my queen, I already have my calculation from earlier to tell me that I'll end up, at the very least, up a rook there. So that's why I'm not really concerned about those. But not a single piece in the position can help defend the f3 square. Bishop d5 isn't even possible, and I'm not sure it would help. And again, all these variations that you're seeing here might work out significantly worse if my queen was somewhere else. Do you remember earlier when I said like, oh, why don't we put our queen on f5? Well, in this position, imagine the queen is there. It's like you're just opening yourself up to tactics with the rook, and they just seem unnecessary. Why would you want to deal with them? Queen h5 is just such a great square to attack the knight, in on this diagonal, it's out of harm's way, and it protects the bishop. So definitely the move you're going to want to play every time. A very tough position for my opponent, though. This is all off the back of a 4 knights opening and just walking into a trap that, honestly, if that trap was executed properly by my opponent, like if his reaction to it was the best possible, I would be maybe slightly better, or maybe just equal. Like, not a serious advantage for me. Preferable, maybe slight edge, but nothing crazy. But it's funny how that one tactic, because I'm saying tactic because I'm not even like winning a pawn. It's actually just equal material at the end, but it is a preferable position for me. That one tactic basically won me the game in 11 moves. So that's how to KO the 4 knights. Let's have a look-see. Let's have a look-see. Four knights, I mean, can't hate on this. And you'll notice here in the engine's recommendations that bishop c4 is not really in the top moves. So bishop c4 is one of these moves where it's in the book, but it's in the book that you don't want to be reading. It's like bishop c4 is a book move. Black's better. Huh? Knight takes e4 and black is already a little bit better. That's just how it works. Now, white needs to take this back. The other option is like, oh, why would I play this line? I'm going to lose my castling rights. You're correct. But after this, d5 kicks your knight away. You can give me this check, but you'll notice it does not help you. I move my king. There's no danger anymore. I'm going to kick you out with h6. You're going to have to play this awful looking knight h3. I have the bishops developing to some amazing squares. e4 is going to kick this knight back to g1. Like, it's complete disaster for white here. It's -2, even though the material is equal. So this would be really, really bad. So white kind of has to take here. And then I play d5. And you'll notice that all moves except bishop d3 are just insufficient. Number one, if I pick a piece to save, it's going to be the bishop. The bishop's better than the knight. So if I save the knight, but I lose the bishop, it's already not worth it. For example, queen e2. Yes, the knight's hanging, but I would definitely take the bishop. And the position is, you know, it's a serious evaluation, even though after queen c4, the material would be equal. So you have to save the bishop. But then what my opponent did was save the bishop, but lost material because he wasn't able to claim that pawn back. Bishop b5 looks like a funny way to try to get material back, right? Knight takes e5. Unfortunately, this walks into something that you do not want to fall for. It's a really nice trick, I guess. And it's involving the same thing that I did in the game. So knight takes e5. Yes, it's a pin. And yes, if bishop d7, like, we could trade and white would actually be completely fine here. But the nasty thing is queen g5 makes the exact same threat. Queen g5 hits the knight, hits this pawn. That would be a great way to play for black. On top of that, queen d5 is already a really good move. But queen g5 is exactly the move I used in the game, and it's really, really nasty to deal with. Knight takes c6, and you're like, oh, you know, I'm going to take back and win the rook. Well, not so quick, bucko. Queen takes b5, and all of a sudden, your knight has nothing better than to go back, and white is all over the position. Or sorry, black's all over the position. 2 bishops. This is really nasty. The queen returns to g5. Bishop g4 again. Castle long. I mean, the position is a serious negative evaluation, even though the material is equal. All that to say, my opponent played this, and after pawn takes here, this knight has to go back to g1, which is a terrible concession. Queen g5. Again, my opponent kind of probably should have played king f1, but after this, bishop g4, and white's lost here. It's -5. It's as if white's down a rook. That's a really nasty evaluation. Notice queen h5, significantly better than other options. That will always be the case. So just a good reaction to keep in mind. And yeah, e4, just best move. Attack that pinned piece with a pawn. It's not to say that knight d4, it's not to say that long castle are not good moves. They're great moves. But to me, e4 is just so simple, so good. You know you're going to win material by force here. And my opponent resigned. I mean, it was a very short game. It was a very short game. This was a resignation, but honestly, it was pretty much over from this knight takes e4 move. It wasn't forced. This is what could have happened. Bishop d3, the best move. But people do not react very well to knight takes e4, and black usually just ends up winning. So if you did this, bishop d6, castle, you know, maybe the idea of f5 in the future. This is A+ for black, and as you can see, we're equal, but maybe even slightly better. So yeah, this knight takes e4 trick doesn't just win the game for me, but people react to it poorly, so I end up with an amazing position. And even if they react to it as best as they possibly could, it would still be good for black. So it's an achievement no matter what. So knight takes e4, it's just a good thing to remember, because a lot of people, when they're developing the opening, if they play bishop c4 or bishop b5, sure, they're playing a different line. But if they play knight c3, I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that after you play this, the next move is bishop c4. I can just guarantee it. No one is going to play bishop b5, because then you may as well play the Ruy Lopez. Why have this knight here at all? And they're not going to play d3 because they're told they need to get the bishop out. So everyone is going to play bishop c4, and everyone's going to fall into this. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. Just make sure you don't play bishop c5, because then the trick that you're trying to sucker people into, you're going to get suckered into yourself. Notice how this is the exact same thing. Just don't fall for it yourself. Very important. If you're going to spend time learning it, also make sure you remember not to fall for it yourself. Bishop c5 is an oopsies.